Side 3, The Broken Bubble by Philip K. Dick, continuing on page 76. That's no lie, Ferda Heinke said. Hey, you want me to go take it manually until we're at Dodo's? No, Grimmelman said. It's okay. The open horch, with no one inside, sailed down Fillmore Street among the buses and taxis and stock cars. As usual, its empty driver's seat was unnoticed. Art, Grimmelman said, you operate the assault weapon. Reaching around on the floor of the Plymouth, he was crowded in the back seat with Ferda Heinke and piles of equipment. He located the assault weapon, a spray gun filled with white enamel paint. But he did not feel in the mood. The spray gun was a dead weight, and he handed it to Ferda. You get them, he said. What's the matter? Grimmelman demanded. I told you to do it. He shook his head. I don't know. I don't feel like it. Ahead of them was Dodo's. At the curb, a sparkling new Detroit bomb was parked. Its occupants were inside the drive-in, at the counter. Bactrians, Grimmelman said. The car was a '56 Buick, dark green and white. Park the horch, Joe said excitedly. Grimmelman caused the horch to glide to the curb at the end of the block. There, with its motor idling, it parked and waited. Now, Grimmelman said. Ferda Heinke, leaning from the window of the Plymouth, sprayed paint on the green fender of the Buick, spelling out, "Fuck you." Okay, he said, finishing. Let's go. Art lay back against the seat as the Plymouth shot forward. His heart was not in it, and he began to think about Rachel. Behind them, the Bactrians were rushing out of Dodo's and into their Buick. But he did not care. Stop, Grimmelman ordered Joe. Around the corner like before. The Plymouth screeched around the corner, past the parked horch, and came to a stop. At the drive-in, the Bactrians were starting up their Buick. As the Buick left the curb, Grimmelman propelled the horch from its parking place out into traffic, into the path of the Buick. Lily Whitehurst, the horch's speaker boomed at the Buick as the Buick swerved past it, trying to get around it. Now the horch blocked the side street and prevented the Buick from turning. The Buick went on past with the horch following. Joe Mantilla backed the Plymouth onto Fillmore and followed after the horch. Ahead of the horch, the Buick snaked from side to side as the Bactrians stuck their heads out and peered back, bewildered. Lily Whitehurst, the horch's speaker thundered, a gross and magnified voice directly behind them. They could easily see that nobody was at the wheel. The horch was frighteningly empty. Speed it up, Ferda said to Grimmelman. The horch gained on the Buick and slammed against its rear bumper. The Bactrians, in panic, spun around the corner and vanished. They had given up. The encounter was over. Okay, Grimmelman said. That's enough. Joe Mantilla halted the Plymouth in a driveway as Grimmelman turned the horch in a ponderous U-turn. Presently, they were following it back in the direction they had come. What's the matter? Ferda Heinke said to Art, digging him in the ribs. Nothing. He felt glum. For the first time, he had failed to enjoy an encounter. Grimmelman said, He wants to go home. That's right, he said. An uncomfortable silence fell over them. Maybe next time, Art said. I got a lot of worries this week. Both Joe Mantilla and Ferda Heinke were glancing at him apprehensively, but Grimmelman ignored him. He concentrated on the task of directing the horch. Christ, Art said, it's not my fault. I got a lot of responsibilities. His apology went unanswered. 8. That Saturday night, Jim Briskin was across the bay in Berkeley, at his mother's home on Spruce Street. With his key, he still kept a key to the white concrete house in which he had been born, he unlocked the basement door and began sorting among the stacks of boxes piled by the pipes of the furnace. The cement floor under his feet was cold. Spiderwebs had spread out over the jars and bottles along the windowsills. At the far end of the basement was a combination washer-dryer, and that was new. He did not remember that. Among the clothes and magazines and furniture, he found the camping equipment. First he carried the Coleman stove and lamp to his car, parked in the driveway, and then he gathered up the tent and took that too. While he was inspecting the air mattresses, the door at the top of the stairs opened, and the stairs lights came on. "It's me," he said, as his mother appeared. "I saw your car," Mrs. Briskin said. "What a surprise. Weren't you going to say hello? Were you just going to come and pick up what you wanted and then leave?" With her hand on the stair railing, she descended, a short, gray-haired woman, wearing a housecoat and slippers. He had not seen his mother in 2 or 3 years, and, as far as he could tell, she looked exactly the same. She was no more infirm or stooped or halting. She was as vigilant as always. He said, "I thought I'd take a camping trip." "Come upstairs and say hello while you're here. There's some rolled roast left over from dinner. I read in the newspaper about your quitting your job at the station. Does that mean you'll be moving back here again to this side of the bay?" "I didn't quit my job," he said. He loaded the tent and the air mattresses and sleeping bags into the back of his car. "Is she still working there?" his mother asked. "If you want my opinion, you're a whole lot better off away from there, if for no other reason than because of her. As long as you're both working around each other, you're not really free of her." After he'd closed up the car, he went upstairs with his mother and had a cup of coffee in the long living room, with its carpeted floors and picture window overlooking the bay, its lamps and piano and prints on the walls. The living room was the same, except that the fir trees by the window had grown taller. In the evening darkness, the trees blew and rustled. Seeing the living room again reminded him of his first year of marriage, the year in which he had tried to get Patricia and his mother to come to some kind of terms. Pat, with her preoccupations, had been unaware of Mrs. Briskin, and his mother had responded with hostility. His mother could never accept a daughter-in-law who was not respectful. As far as he could tell, Patricia had no opinions about his mother. She enjoyed the house, its size and sturdiness, the large rooms and the view of the bay, and especially the garden. Patricia entered the house as if she were alone in it. The house was where he had grown up, and during the summer she liked to spend time out in the backyard, in one of the canvas lawn chairs, sunbathing and listening to the radio and reading and drinking beer. Patricia had one day come indoors in her bathing suit and thrown herself down to have a long talk with his mother. The marriage was already coming apart, and Pat had a lot to talk about. With her was a bottle of Riesling. Lying on the floor, on the rug, in her bathing suit, she drank and talked, while his mother, as the old woman related it, sat stiffly in a chair in the corner, disapproving and unsympathetic. Pat's erratic sorrow had gone on until finally the afternoon was over, and still she lay on the floor. The Riesling was gone, and she was either sound asleep or had completely passed out. His mother had telephoned him, and he had come and gotten her. He found her still in her bathing suit at 7 o'clock in the evening, still on the living room floor. On the trip back across the bay to their apartment in San Francisco, she had mumbled, and it had seemed funny to him. He could not work up the indignation his mother felt. The scene was the last between Patricia and his mother. As far as he could tell, Patricia remembered almost nothing of it. She thought that she had gone to sleep in the garden, by herself. "What about this camping trip?" his mother asked, seated across from him. "How long do you expect to be gone?" "I just want to get away," he said. "You're going by yourself? I noticed you took both the sleeping bags." His mother went on to recall the camping trips he had made with his father, the excursions up to the Sierras. She did not mention the trips which he and Pat had made together. "I have to go somewhere," he said, interrupting. "I have to do something." His mother said, "I wish you could meet some nice girl." He thanked his mother for the coffee and drove back across the bay to San Francisco. Parked before his apartment house, he opened the glove compartment and brought out all the road maps. But he was not going on a camping trip. He had already given up the idea. Putting the maps away, he drove in the direction of the station. An hour later, in a back room at station KOIF, Jim Briskin sat sorting through the station's record library. On the floor was a carton half filled with albums he was taking. Beside it was the carton he had brought back. On the table were his personal items, his bottle of Anacin, nose drops, a hat he wore on rainy days, pencils and pens, letters he had saved that had arrived over the years, and odds and ends that he had stuck away in the desk at which he worked. Nothing at all of particular value. Frank Hubble kicked open the door from the broadcast studio. An LP of Gershwin tunes was on the turntable, 20 minutes of music. Hubble, lighting his pipe, said, "What are you doing?" "Taking home my stuff, bringing station stuff back." "Why don't you leave it all here? You'll be back in August." "Maybe not," he said. Tossing a dead match across the room to the wastebasket, Hubble said, "Patricia was in earlier." "That's why I'm in late," he said. It was after 10 o'clock. "I don't mean during the day. I mean around 15 minutes ago. She was supposed to meet Bob, but he's out closing some deal. You know how he operates." "More used car lots?" Jim said. He could imagine Bob Posen still out, still chasing down contacts. "No, this is for a food account. She was all dressed up. I guess they were going out for a good time." Jim continued sorting the records from the cabinet. A fat Swaller disc slipped from his fingers, and he seized it and stuffed it into the carton. It was not his, but the hell with it. He wanted to finish and get out of the station. "Take it easy," Frank said. Puffing on his pipe, he strolled back into the studio and closed the door. While he was returning the station's records to the cabinet, a woman's voice said from behind him, "Hello, Jim." "Hi," he said, continuing to work. Pat entered the office. Her clothes, as always, were the best, he thought, noticing her shoes, her high heels, the straps at her ankles. She wore a rust-colored suit. A coat was over her arm, and on her hair was a small, simple hat. How red her lips are, he thought. Her figure was remarkable, but he was wise enough to recognize it from the bra ads. It was a professional figure, done with wire hoops and cones and straps. Too much pointing. Too much of an upward angle. "What time did you get up?" she said. "The next morning." "Around 10, he said. "I thought you should sleep, so I didn't wake you up. Did you see my note?" "No, I cleared out as soon as I could." Pat said, "I said in the note that you should go ahead and have breakfast. There was bacon and eggs in the refrigerator. And if you wanted lunch, there was a frozen chopped steak in the freezer." "To tell you the truth," he said, "I saw the note, but I wanted to get out." "Why?" She walked over beside him, and the hem of her coat dangled by his shoulder. Close beside him, her legs were smooth in that fine, regular manner. It was so gratifying to the touch. "Because," he said, "I was miserable enough as it was." "You saw the write-up in the Chronicle?" Pouring the odds and ends into the carton, he prepared to carry his possessions downstairs. "I'm parked in the taxi zone," he said. "I don't know how long I can get away with it." "Are you moving out your things?" "Pretty much." She followed as he lugged the carton along the hall to the stairs. "Can I carry anything?" "I can manage," he said. "Use the elevator." "Habit." He returned to the hall and, with the corner of the carton, punched the button for the elevator. "You going out tonight?" "Yes," she said. "You look good," he said. "When did you get that suit?" "I've had it." The elevator arrived, and Pat held the door aside for him. "Don't come down with me," he said. "Why not?" She was already in the elevator. She touched the button, and the elevator descended. "I can help you with the car door." When they reached the ground floor, she went ahead of him. He carried his load outside onto the sidewalk and to his parked car. Sure enough, a San Francisco cop was prowling at the license plate, considering it for a ticket. His motorcycle leaned by the curb, and he was already reaching his gloved hands toward his pad and pencil. "Station business," Jim said, balancing his load to get out his keys. "Records and scripts." The cop eyed him. "We always use this loading zone." As Pat opened the car door, he shoved the carton inside onto the back seat and went quickly around to the wheel. "This is a taxi zone," the cop informed him. "I'll be right out of here," he said, starting the motor. The cop shook his head and returned to his motorcycle. Jumping bodily on the accelerator, he roared off into the nighttime traffic and was gone. "I have to go back up," Jim said. He had forgotten his hat and Anderson bottle. "Will he be back?" Pat said. "No," he said, shutting off the motor. "Not for a while." They went back up, this time walking up the flight of stairs. The building was cold and deserted, and the stairs were gloomy. Beside him, Pat put on her coat. He helped her with it. "It's scary," she said, "this late at night." She held on to the banister. He said, "I appreciated that, your letting me stay." "I wish," she said, "I wish we could have gone ahead." She stared down at the steps. Upstairs on the station floor, she caught Frank Hubbell's attention through the glass window of the broadcasting booth. When he stepped out, she said, "Has Bob been in?" "No," Hubbell said. "Not since you were in last." While Jim got his hat and Anison bottle, she telephoned Bob Poson's apartment. Hanging up, she said, "No answer." "He's out making money," Jim said. They went back down the flight of stairs. There, under the windshield wiper of his car, was a ticket. "He came back," Pat said. "He or one of his kind." Furiously, Jim tossed the hat and Anison bottle in with the other things. "You should have moved it," she said, "when he told you to." "How do you like that?" he said, trying to control himself. "You can't believe in anything anymore." "You always hated to get a ticket." He stuffed the ticket into his pocket. "Don't you? That's $10 shot. For nothing." "Calm down," Pat said. "Good night." He started into the car. "Wait," she said hesitantly. "I don't want you to go off like this. Why don't you take me across the street? That wouldn't do any harm." He looked to see what was across the street. Most of the shops were closed and dark, and he dismissed them. But the Roundhouse cocktail lounge was open, and he realized that she meant it. "The bar?" he said. "No," she said, changing her mind. "Let it go." "Why not?" he said, taking hold of her arm. Why not, indeed, he thought to himself, not letting her go. "I'd better not," she said. "If it was all right for me to stay with you the other night." He led her across the street. The traffic was held up at a light, and onto the far curb. "This certainly ought to be okay." She was nervous. "It's so much like a date, as if you were taking me out again." "I am," he said, keeping tight hold of her. Pulling away, she walked a few rapid steps. Her heels clacked on the pavement. "I was just afraid if you drove you might be under too much strain. You are, aren't you? You might hit something, and I'd blame myself." "Suit yourself," he said, pushing open the doors of the bar. With all his willpower, he kept himself from looking back. The doors swung shut, and he was inside, alone. The Roundhouse was a small, high-class bar where the drinks were mostly water and cost more than he could afford. He traditionally avoided the place. The booth seats were red leather with brass studs. Quite a number of women were at the bar, and they were all well-dressed. At the rear, a jukebox played dance music, strings and winds. The air was close. Everyone seemed to be smoking as well as talking. He stood for a moment, and while he was standing, the doors opened behind him, and Pat entered. Her face was pale. "Come sit down," he said, leading her to a booth and feeling inside him a terrible sweep of hope. He was in a state of tension, and as he helped her take off her coat, his hand shook. "You're worked up, aren't you?" she said, touching his wrist. "No," he said, seating himself across from her. "Just about to go out of my mind." "Do you expect much out of this?" "Don't expect much. For my sake, please don't make something out of this. I just want to sit here and have something to drink." The waitress appeared. "What do you want?" Jim asked the woman across from him. "Just order me something I can finish." She placed her hands together before her, touching her purse. What she wanted was scotch or bourbon, and not a mixed drink, a sweet drink. Too many sweet drinks made her sick, and he remembered mornings when he had fed her tomato juice and soft-boiled eggs and dry toast until she was able to get out of bed and onto her feet. After he had ordered, he said to her, "Remember that New Year's Day we drove over to Sausalito to that joint out over the water? You lost your shoe. You sat down on the curb and wouldn't get into the car?" She said, "I think I should call Hubbell and tell him if Bob shows up to come over here." "Don't play coy," he said. "I'm not." The drinks arrived, and she picked up hers. "Do you think I am? Do you think I'm a tease?" "No," he said. "I am." "Because of the other night?" He drank his own drink. It only made things worse. But it's as bad for me as it is for you. I feel terrible. I really wish I could die. Already, most of her drink was gone. When she was in a crisis, she drank, and this was a crisis for both of them. At each booth was a ceramic ashtray as large as a pipe tray, and gray. He inspected the one by his elbow. While he was holding it, he realized that Pat was on her feet. I'm going to go phone. Order me another. She walked off, gliding forward without individual steps. Her coat was over her arm. The fall of it blended with her carriage, her upright posture. She lifted her chin and straightened the lines of her neck. At the same time, she seemed to know exactly where her feet were. He could not imagine her stumbling. Get him? He asked when she returned. Still no answer. She picked up her fresh drink. He's probably reading Looney Loop plugs. After she had gone deep into her second drink, she said, I want to show you something. It's a present. Opening her purse, she lifted forth a small tissue paper package. For Bob. I got it in Chinatown. She unwrapped a deity figure, which he had seen many, many times. It's a god. It brings luck. She ran a nail across the stomach of the deity. What do you think of it? He had to tell her it was trash. Oh, she said. Well, what do you think of this? Or maybe I shouldn't show it to you. Another package was visible, but she put her hand over it, concealing it. I'd like to see it, he said. With great deliberation, she unwrapped the package. A bracelet, he said, taking it. Silver, handmade. She reached for it, and he wound it around her wrist. The bracelet slipped to the table. It was massive. He helped fasten it for her. Thanks, she said. See the jade? Dull stones were set in the silver fret and scrollwork. It's Indian, he said. India? She said doubtfully. American Indian. Probably Navajo. What do you think of it? You know I'm not much on that sort of stuff. Too heavy, too much bulk. I like those thin hoops you used to wear. Reaching up, he touched her ear. Those earrings. They should have told me it wasn't Chinese, she said. It was a Chinese store. The man was a Chinese. She finished her drink, and he thought that she was beginning to get that fixed look. Her features were becoming rigid. She had worked hard all day, and she was too tired to cope with the situation between them. Too much, he thought, for both of them. His old tenderness sprang to life inside him, his feeling for her. He knew how unhappy she was, sitting here across from him. She could not leave, and, for her, remaining was unbearable. So she was drinking. Let's go, he said, rising. He put her coat around her, handed her her purse, and, with his hands on her shoulders, persuaded her to get to her feet. Where? She said. In her fatigue and confusion, she was malleable. She wanted him to take charge. I should be over at the station. Suppose he comes and I'm not there. All right, he said. We'll go back there. They left the Roundhouse and recrossed Geary Street. As they passed his parked car, he saw that a second ticket was stuck under the windshield wiper. The hell with it. Upstairs in the station, he switched on the best amplifier and turntable. From the studio, Hubble watched, smoking his pipe as he fiddled with wires. Pat had withdrawn into a corner, taking no part in what he was doing. He plugged in a jack, closed a toggle switch, and as the tubes of the Bogan amplifier reddened, he rasped his finger against the diamond needle of the transcription arm. From the speaker, a gross "foof, foof" sounded, an enormous tumult. This was quality equipment. Over the years, he had helped assemble it. When he looked for Pat, she was gone. The door of the broadcast studio opened, and Frank Hubble said, What's going on, pal? Nothing. You going to hold forth here? No, he said. Over the years, he had come here and used the station's playback equipment. In a sense, it was his. Hubble said, Of course, it's fine by me. Like old times. But I'll be locking up at 12, and you don't have a key anymore. He started to go through his pockets, and then he remembered that, of course, he didn't have a key. He had given it to Haynes. Without answering, he went searching for Pat. The door to the roof was open, and he stepped outside onto the rickety wooden catwalk. Pat stood leaning with her elbows on the railing, smoking a cigarette, and gazing across the roof at the lights and traffic of the street below. "I wanted to clear my head," she said. "Did you have that much to drink?" "Yes." She lifted her face. "Before I came up here, before I ran into you, I was already over at the Roundhouse." "How many?" "I don't know." "You look all right," he said, his fingers on her neck, at the line of her chin. She said, "I feel as if I'm walking along a long drain pipe, one of those pipes we used to crawl through when we were kids, bent over." She drew away from him. "You were going to play records for me, weren't you? Like we used to before we were married." "May I?" he said. "Do you have to?" "I just want to stand out here. I don't think Bob's coming. Please, you go ahead on in. I'll stay out here, please." Going back in, he took an album from the record cabinet, an old Victor 78 RPM set of the Sibelius Symphony No. 7. Hubble had returned to the broadcast studio. He was reading a commercial into the boom mic. His voice was audible from the wall monitor, and Jim shut it off. The discs were in a manual sequence. He put side one on the turntable and lowered the arm. Now Frank Hubble was watching through the window of the studio. He scowled with disapproval. How wicked, Jim thought, to be playing records. A man trying to draw out and hold his own wife. The music, with its progression upward, its heavy quality of darkness and isolation, helped clear his mind. The weight seemed to pass from him into the music. The great structure of the music absorbed it and accepted it from him. So, he thought, he discovered at this late date that the stuff had a use. He got the music up loud enough to reach across the station, from one room to the next, out onto the roof where Pat stood in the darkness. At such volume, the music could not be evaded. Listening, he paced back and forth. He became restless, and suddenly he was afraid that no time was passing. The music had put an end to everything. As he was putting on the second record, Bob Posen appeared. "What a racket," he said. "I could hear it all the way downstairs. Isn't it getting over the air?" "No," Jim said, demoralized. In his mind, he had written Bob Posen out of existence. "Is Patricia here?" Entering the room, Pat said, "Where have you been?" "I was tied up, straightening out the Granny Goose potato chip material." He said it with anger. Pat said, "I can't go out. It's too late. Take my word for it. You wouldn't want to be with me tonight. I've had too much to drink, and all I want to do is go home. We can go out some other time. She'll be there for at least a week, and if she's gone, we can see her when she's back this way." She seated herself with her coat and purse on her lap. The drinks had begun to affect her outwardly. Her face was waxen. "Just go off and leave me. Will you do that?" Standing his ground, Bob said, "At least let me drive you home." "Have you ever seen a woman throw up 9 drinks?" Bob Posen left. "I'll see you tomorrow. Good night." "Don't come near me," Pat said as Jim approached her. "I know you," he said. He led her from the station and downstairs to his car. She walked slowly, step by step, her eyes on the ground. In the lobby she halted, and, try as he might, he could not budge her. "I'm scared," she said. "I'm too drunk to go with you. I know how you feel about me. Honest to God, Jim, I can't go with you. There's no point in talking about it. I mean it, and you know me well enough to know I mean it. And if I passed out, would you want me like that? That isn't what you want. I'm going to sit down here." With care, she went to the lobby couch, the old, ratty, bedraggled couch, and stood beside it. "Go away," she said. "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave me alone." He walked out onto the sidewalk and then around the block, past bars and closed-up shops, until he reached the side entrance to the station's parking lot. By the long route, he came back to the McLaughlin building. In the lot was Pat's car, and she was trying to start it. The headlights were on, and with each turn of the starter motor, the lights dimmed to a feeble yellow. In the darkness, he watched her, feeling compassion for her. The car door was open, and she was crouched over the wheel, her arm resting on it, her coat spilled onto the floor by her feet. She was crying. He could hear her where he stood. At last the engine caught, and the headlights flared up. Pat slammed the car door, threw the gear into drive, and drove directly into a car parked across from hers. The bumpers tangled with a grating, metallic shriek. The engine died, and Pat sat without moving, her hand over her face. Walking over, he saw that no harm had been done. Both bumpers were scratched, but that was all. Nobody would care. He opened the car door and said, "Sweetheart." "I won't let you," she said. She was clutching the wheel, and on her face was the set, fanatic look that she got once in a long while. She was terrified of him and what she had done. Probably she thought she had demolished the other car. "Look," he said, "I don't want anything to happen to you. You can't drive. You'll kill yourself." She nodded. "Let me drive you to your place. I won't go in. I'll park you in front of the building, and I'll leave you." "How'll you get back here? You have to come back for your car." "I'll walk, or take a cab." "That isn't right," he said. "Then I'll send you home in a cab." "Don't." She caught hold of him, her fingernails dug into him. "It's dark there. I want to be out somewhere." Tears shone on her cheeks. "It's awful living alone. I have to marry Bob Posen, don't you see? I can't stand living alone. I can't stand waking up in the morning alone and going to bed alone at night and eating alone." Kneeling against the seat, he put his arms around her and pulled her to him. Kissing her, he said, "Then let's go to my place." For a moment, for the passing of one breath, she seemed to give in. Then, without pulling away from him, she said, "I can't." "What then?" "I don't know." Her voice was bleak. Tears fell onto his face. Tears rolled onto his nose, tickling him. "I wish I hadn't let you stay with me the other night. I just can't stand it without somebody any longer." "Somebody?" he said, enraged. "You, then." "Oh, God." "All right, take me to your place, and let's go to bed and get it over with. Hurry." Jerking away from him, she scrambled over to make room for him. "Let's go. Drive me there. I'm tired, and I give up." He sighed. "I tell you what," he said. "I have a couple of friends. 2 kids." Her head turned, and she was looking at him. In the darkness, her gaze was fixed on him. He was aware of it, the intensity. "They invited me for dinner last night," he said. "Suppose we go over there and stay a while. Until you're sobered up. Okay? They're nice kids. They've been in the station. You've probably seen them." Pat said nothing, but the struggle reached him, the sense of torment. "The girl's pregnant," he said. "She's 17, the boy's 18. They live in a broken-down flat on Fillmore. They don't have any friends, and their families aren't speaking to them. They don't have any money, and they'd like to see somebody once in a while." After a long time, Pat said, "What are they like?" Rallying, she said, "Is she pretty?" "Very pretty," he said. He was still kneeling against the seat, and now he stood up. He was stiff, cramped. "Very sweet, very bright." "She doesn't sound very bright. She could have taken precautions." For a time she was silent. "How did you meet them?" "They came into the station. I took them with me when I went to dinner." "What's their names?" "Rachel, Art." Pat slid away until she rested against the far door. He gathered up her coat and purse and put them into her lap. "Just until I feel better," she said. "Okay." Relieved, he got in behind the wheel and started up the engine. "Did I damage that car? I never hit anybody's car before." "It'll live," he said. He backed her Dodge away and then drove from the parking lot. 9. On Fillmore Street, the neon signs of bars and shops put on color haphazardly for Saturday night. Their arrangement had been built up over the years by businessmen. Spots of gum on the pavement formed dark circles near the entrance of a movie theater, a bowling alley, the illuminated door of a coffee shop. As late as this, a flow of persons, white and Negro and Mexican, passed the shops. In doorways, figures had left the flow and were by themselves. They were mostly boys. They wore black leather jackets and jeans, and for the most part, they were surprisingly lean. They stood with their thumbs hooked in their back pockets. They twisted to follow elements within the flow, as if they had some special interest. At the popping of an exhaust, they raised their heads. They listened. Their mouths opened. They caught signals. Then they looked back at the individuals and made judgments about them. Spectators, they saw everyone and had an opinion. In the middle of the block, Jim located the house set back from the pavement, the fence and iron gate. "That's it," he said. "Maybe they're not up," Pat said. He was able to park near the house. Together, he and Pat walked up the sidewalk. He opened the gate, and they passed on in, to darkness and the sudden loss of street sounds. The cement path was ahead, but neither of them could see it. Reaching, he took Pat's hands. Her fingers were cold, and he enclosed them. To the right of the porch, the basement window showed a rim of light. "They're awake," he said. "It's so late," Pat said. She stumbled, and a metal object rolled away, a tin can that glinted and then vanished into weeds. He went down the steps, leaving her behind him. Against the streetlight, she was slim and small, buried within her coat. Her head was up, and she walked in a circle, her heels making sharp, staccato clicks on the cement. He knocked on the door. The door opened, and light flooded out. Rachel recognized him and said, "Oh, hello." Backing away from him and holding the door open, she said, "We were playing cards." He said to her, "This is in the nature of a favor. I have somebody with me, and she isn't feeling well. We thought maybe we could drop by for a while. Were you just about to go to bed?" "No," she said. She seemed to accept the situation. "Come on in." Going back for Pat, he led her down the steps and into the apartment. This was a sort of inspiration. You can throw us out any time. Cards and poker chips were scattered across the top of the massive oak table. Something about the room had struck him as odd, and now he knew what it was. The walls were bare of pictures. "This is Patricia Gray," he said. He did not try to describe their relationship. He was not certain what he had said to them. "I think I've seen you at the station," Art said. He started to pull out his hand and then hid it in his pocket. Rachel said, "Can I fix you some coffee or something to eat?" She was standing close to Pat, and she had ducked in what seemed a survival of a curtsy. She wore a print dress, a bright summery frock, strapless. Her shoulders were bare. Her skin was fairer than Pat's. Her hair was much lighter and cut much shorter. Possibly she was smaller, but her expanded middle made it hard for him to tell. As he helped Pat off with her coat, she said, "It's warm in here. It's nice." "You bet," he said. "What huge, lovely eyes she has." Turning to Rachel, she said, "You make me want to take up painting again." During the first year of their marriage, she had cleaned a few brushes and made a few sketches, but nothing had been completed. The set of paints, as far as he knew, was now stored or thrown away. Certainly she had given up all pretensions along that line. Art hugged Rachel close to him. "She's going to have a baby." "Why, you're just a little doll," Pat said. "I can't get over her," she said to Jim. "You're not only drunk," he said. "You're also queer." "I mean it. I'd like to paint her sometime. Those eyes." And then she moved off. Following her, he said, "What would help? Coffee?" "Yes," she said. He went with Rachel into the kitchen. "She's under a lot of a strain," he said, as Rachel put the coffee pot on the burner and got down cups and saucers. "She's high-strung, isn't she?" Rachel said. "I kind of like her." "You're sweet to let us in," he said. "I'm grateful. We were out roaming around. It was no good." "How long were you married?" 3 years, he said. "I wanted to meet her. I'm glad you came. I know she means a great deal to you." "That's true," he said. "I can see why," Rachel said. She seemed shy and conscientious, concerned with doing what was right. She carried the coffee cups into the living room and began clearing the table. "What were you playing?" he asked. "Blackjack." She swept the deck of cards together and put it in its box. One time we drove to Reno. We stayed there overnight. We played at the different tables. Art said, "She's a real cool poker player. She takes it real seriously. One time she knocked off Ferda Hankey's glasses because he was fooling around." In his nervousness, he avoided looking at Jim and Pat. He grabbed up the poker chips and concentrated on them. He pretended that he was talking to no one in particular. Several times in his visits to station KOIF, he had noticed Pat. He considered her beautiful. She reminded him of the women in fashion ads. The idea that such a woman would visit his house filled him with excitement. Only once had Rachel worn heels, and that was on the day they had gotten married. Glancing at Pat, he was aware of her dark hair and the intense color of her mouth. Makeup, he thought. He wondered how old she was. She was sitting by the table, and he was attracted to her legs. They seemed to him long and curved, and he wondered if she was a model. She was so well dressed and beautiful that he went off into the other room and tried to think how he might improve himself. He examined one of his sport coats and a pair of slacks. When he re-entered the living room, Rachel offered him a cup of coffee. Jim Briskin was standing by the table holding a cup and saucer. His head brushed close to the ceiling of the room, and in such small quarters he seemed especially tall. He wore a loose coat, his regular coat, and no tie. Art wondered how he could go around with Pat and not dress up. His own mind was filled with notions and schemes about clothes. Taking the coffee cup, he paced about with it. He was this close to such a woman, and at the same time he was farther away than ever. He had no idea what he might say to her. He was afraid to open his mouth. His own muteness offended him. Probably she would never come back, and he would never have this chance again. In agitation, he said to her, Hey, how long have you worked at the station?" Pat said, "I don't know." To Jim Briskin, she said, "When did I start?" Bending, she unfastened her high-heeled shoes and slid them off. She saw him looking at her, and she smiled. "How is it, working at a station?" Art said, as calmly as he could. Pat said, "It's noisy." "You want a month off?" Jim Briskin said. "Sure," she said. In her stocking feet, she went across the room to the radio. "Can I turn it up?" Dance music was playing. She made it louder. "Not too loud," Jim Briskin said. "Is this too loud?" Remaining by the radio, she closed her eyes. Art thought she looked tired, but he did not know what he could do for her. He walked in her direction without any plan. Jim Briskin said, "You better come sit down and drink your coffee." "It's excellent coffee," she said. "Is there anything to drink? I don't feel like coffee." "You don't feel like drinking," Jim Briskin said. "I do." She opened her eyes. "Not very much, just something." Art said, "There's some beer in the icebox." She paid no attention to him, and he went toward the kitchen. "I'll get you some." Still looking at Jim Briskin, Pat said, "You want to dance with me?" "You're in no state to dance." "Then you don't want to dance with me." "Come sit down." Jim Briskin reached out his hand toward her. "What do you want to do, sit in my lap?" "No." As Art went into the kitchen, she was beginning to idle back and forth, a restless motion. Her hands were up, and she had shut her eyes again. His heart ached at the sight of such a pretty and tired woman in her stocking feet, swaying beside the radio, her hands empty. The feeling was familiar to him, the yearning without an object. She did not really want to dance. She wanted to not be still, to be in motion. She could not bring herself to sit down. Taking out the quart of beer, he poured a glassful and carried it into the living room. "Here," he said. Pat shrank away. "What?" she said. "Oh, thanks. No, I don't want beer." And his contact with her was broken. She was no longer aware of him. Gliding away, she hummed to herself, the tuneless, jangling release of pain. "That's all we have around," Art said. Now she returned. Her motion carried her back toward him. Her eyes opened, and she focused on him as if she were awakening. "Will you dance with me?" she said. "Art, is that your name?" Her hand came to rest on his shoulder, and her other hand was up, waiting to be grasped. Before he had time to make a decision, he had let her slip within his arm, and he had set down the glass of beer and was dancing with her. Her body was warm, and he could feel her backbone beneath his fingers. Her face, close to his, shone damply. Above her lips, tiny drops of perspiration glinted from the line of fuzz. It was a lovely fox-like face, new to him, and yet it was almost touching his. Now she turned her head, sighing, and then looked down. Her black hair tumbled forward, and strands of it swept along his cheek. On his shoulder, her hand rested heavily. You dance good, he said. Suddenly she broke away. Don't you really have anything but beer? Did he tell you to say that? You're turning paranoid, Jim Briskin said, and sit down before you fall over. She directed a hard, calculated glance at him, and then she walked to the kitchen. Art followed her. In the kitchen, she had the icebox door open and was kneeling down, reaching in among the milk bottles. It's true, he said. We don't usually... I believe you, she said, straightening up beside him. Do you know I'm drunk? I feel so... She shook her head. Not in a drain pipe anymore. That's something at least. Maybe I feel romantic. Do I look okay? Lifting her hands, she smoothed her hair. You look fine, he said. Did she get pregnant on purpose? You're very lucky, you know, to have a little doll of a wife like that. Did you go around together in school? Yes, he said. We had classes together. God, Pat said, you're only 18. And what's she, 16? When I was 16, I still thought babies were supplied by the hospital doctors. The woman just got large to make a place for it. Like kangaroos. Kids get older faster now. Why don't you go somewhere and get us a bottle? From the pocket of her skirt, she took out folded bills and handed them to him. She stuck them between his fingers. I saw a liquor store up the street. Get a fifth of rye or bourbon. No scotch. I've had enough scotch. Humiliated, he said, I can't buy liquor. This beer, some guys picked it up, you know? I mean, I can go into a grocery store. I know some of these grocers around here. In a bar, usually they'll serve me. But at the liquor stores, they're real tough. They won't sell liquor to you if you're under 21. It was living death. He slunk in shame. He cringed. But she thought it was funny. You poor damn kid. She reached up, and her arms folded about his neck. The pressure of her mouth slid in a trail across his face. He felt the moist, clinging smear as she kissed him. Unbelievable. She had kissed him. Breathing into his eyes and nose, she said, I'll walk you down, okay? Coming out of the kitchen with her, he said to Rachel and Jim Briskin, We're going down to the corner. We'll be right back. What for? Jim Briskin said. Not to him, but to Pat. None of your business, Pat said. Stopping by him, she kissed him, too. She seemed gay now. Put on your shoes, Jim Briskin said. Supporting herself with her hand pressed to the wall, she bent her leg, lifting her foot behind her, and slipped on her high-heeled shoe. As she did the same with the other, she said, I want you to realize I'm paying for this. I hope so, Jim Briskin said. And you'll pay for it a couple times again tomorrow morning. Who's going to feed you tomato juice? Come on, Pat said to Art. Where's my coat? Finding it for her, he started to hand it to her. Both Rachel and Jim Briskin were watching. Should he hold it up and help her into it? While he was floundering, she took the coat from him and opened the door that led out. Goodbye, she said. We'll be right back. To his wife, Art said, See you in a minute. Rachel said, You might get some potato chips and maybe some of those cheese things. I will, he said, and he closed the door after himself and Pat. Be careful, he said to her. All at once they were in complete darkness. He wanted to take her arm, but he was afraid. He did not understand what was happening. He could not believe it, and so he merely walked beside her up the steps to the cement path. It's sure dark, he said. It's funny. I saw you at the station, but I never said nothing to you. A lot of times we used to come up in a group, around 4 in the afternoon. We always listened to Club 17. We came to talk to Jim Briskin. I guess he isn't on it now. What is he, off for a while?" The woman beside him was silent. At the gate, she stopped to let him push it aside for her. The gate groaned. She went on ahead of him. In the night wind, her hair blew, long and untied. Such hair, he thought, as he had never touched. She walked much more slowly than Rachel, but he thought, as she had said, that she had had a lot to drink. Now on the sidewalk, she wrapped herself in her coat and seemed unaware of him. She gazed at the signs of stores, at the bars, into doorways. "It's cold," he said, "for July. It's the fog." The air was heavy with fog. Around each streetlight was a ring of misty yellow. Traffic sounds had receded, and the footsteps of other persons were muffled, remote. The shapes that passed by were indistinct. "Do you want the baby?" Pat said. "Yes, sure." "A baby will hold you and her together. You're not a family without children. You're just a couple. Do they all tell you not to have a baby? I wish we could have had children. Maybe we'd still be married." "Were you married?" "Jim and I," she said. "Oh," he said, taken by surprise. "How long did you know her before you got married? If I told you how I met Jim, you wouldn't believe it. We went up the coast and we got crocked, and we went to bed together, and that was it. We were up there on the Russian River for a week. 6 days, drinking and going to bed. Walking around Guerneville barefoot. Going swimming. Have you ever been up there?" He was able to say, "Sure, a couple of times. We used to drive up Friday night, a bunch of us, and stay for the weekend." "Did you go up there with Rachel?" "No," he said, "but we went to Reno once." "Do you like to go out?" "Sure," he said. "We used to go bowling a lot, and over to Dodo's, and she likes to play poker, and dancing. She's a cool dancer. And a lot of times we used to go to record shops and stock car races. We drove down to Pebble Beach one time for the races. When we had a car, we drove around. It broke down and we sold it." "So you don't have a car?" "No. I tried to get my brother Nat, who runs this used car lot on Van Ness, to lend me one, but he won't." Pat said, "Did you go around with other girls before you met her?" "No," he said. "Then she's really your girl, like in the movies. The girl you grew up with. The one woman for you." Her hands in the pockets of her coat, she said, "You think there's one girl for every boy? You believe that?" "I don't know," he said. "That's what they say." "Maybe so," he said uncertainly. Reaching out, she ruffled his hair. "Do you know you're cute? You're so young, and you have your one girl. I'll bet you still know kids you hang around with." "I guess so," he said. The liquor store was to their right, and Pat entered it. "Give me back my money," she said to him as they stopped at the front counter. "What'll it be?" the clerk, a middle-aged bald man, said. He smiled a pale, false-teeth smile. "A fifth of Hiram Walker's," Pat said. She took the dollar bills from Art and paid for the liquor. "Good night, folks," the clerk said as they left the store. The cash register jangled. "What are you going to be?" Pat said as they walked back. "When you're old and broken down, like Jim and me?" "A printer," he said. "Hey, when we get back, you want to see the dummies for our science fiction mag? It's called Phantasmagoria. Freda Heinke's president of the fan club. It's called The Beings from Earth." She laughed. "My Lord. It's multi-list. We've got pictures of fans and some drawings. If you can draw, maybe you could draw for the mag. You know?" It seemed a luminous hope. He exploited it for all it was worth. "What do you say?" Pat said, "I'm no good. I can't really draw. I took a couple of art courses in college." Her voice was empty. "Don't look to me for anything, Art. Look what I did to Jim. I can't give. All I wanted to do was take. It was my fault. I know it, but I still can't give him anything. Even when I try, I can't. The other night I wanted to." She broke off. "Have you ever had a woman hold out on you, Art? They're supposed to do that. One kind, anyhow. I never thought of myself as that kind. I just couldn't do it. Maybe I was still resentful. I was punishing him, or maybe I've lost the capacity to give anything to anyone. I never gave anything to Bob Posen. I told Jim I did, but it was just to hurt him. She stopped walking. That's my car, she said. What do you think of it? Going to the curb, he identified it as a new Dodge. Not bad, he said. Too much chrome, but not a bad power plant. Can you drive? Yeah, he said. Reaching into her coat, she brought out car keys. Here, open the door. Dumbfounded, he opened the car door. Pat motioned him in, and he crept in behind the wheel. Where do you go, she said, when you take a girl for a drive? Twin Peaks, he said. I guess. He was beginning to tremble. She slammed the door on her side. Take me up there. Do you mind? I can't go back. He's waiting for me, and I can't. Honest to God, I want to, but I can't. On the descending mountainside, cars were parked, most of them off the road or against the railing. In the cars, shapes stirred slowly, in cumbersome positions. Below the road, the pattern of lights flickered on the streets and houses of San Francisco. A field of lights as far as the eye could see. Fog drifted between the lights, and here and there the lights faded out. There was no sound except from the distant motors of cars. Here? Art said. Okay? He took the car off the road onto a dirt shoulder. Tree branches scraped the hood. He shut off the headlights. Turn the motor off, Pat said. He did so. Beside him, she opened her purse and brought out a pack of cigarettes. He found matches and lit one for her. The match shook, and she steadied his hand. What's the matter? She said. Nothing? Blowing smoke from her nostrils, she said, It's peaceful up here. I haven't been up here in 10 years. Not since I was your age. You know where I grew up? Near Stinson Beach. That's cool up there, he said. We used to go swimming every few days. Do you like to swim? Sure, he said. Are you good? She handed him the package containing the bottle. Maybe you can open it. There's a corkscrew in the dashboard. He managed to get the bottle open. I shouldn't do this, Pat said, taking the bottle. I know I shouldn't, but I have to do something. I can't go on this way. You think he'll forgive me? Rummaging in the glove compartment, she came up with a plastic handless cup. God, she said, it's still got Band-Aids in it. She tossed the cup back in the glove compartment. I don't want to drink. Here. She handed the bottle back to him. Put it away or drink it or something. You know what I came up here for? What? He muttered. I'm looking for something. I'm 27, Art. I'm 10 years older than you. Do you realize that? When I was your age, you were 7. You were in the 1st grade. She sat smoking, her legs crossed. In the dull light entering the car, her legs sparkled. He made out the line of her ankle, her heel. You're sure nice looking, he heard his voice say. Thank you, Art. I mean it, he said. Let's go, she said. Let's get out of here. I don't want to stay here. Obedient, crushed with disappointment, he started up the engine. As he shifted into reverse, Pat reached out her hand and turned the ignition key. The engine died. You actually would, she said. You're so... What is it? Let it go. She put out her cigarette and lit another with a shiny metal lighter. You'd drive me back if I asked you to. You wouldn't put up a fight. You wouldn't argue with me. Do you really like me, Art? Yeah, he said fervently. What about your wife? For that, he had no answer. You're going to be a father, do you realize that, Art? You're going to have a little boy. Have you thought what name you want to call him? No, he said. Not yet. How will you feel? She was staring out at the lights below them. You're a 17-year-old boy, and you're going to be a father. Right, he said. 18, he said. The world's so goddamn peculiar. She turned on the car seat, facing him. She had drawn up her legs and tucked them under her. In the light, her cheekbones were radiant, and he traced in his mind the line of her forehead, the ridge of her eyebrow, and then her nose. She had thin lips. In the half-light, her lips were black. Her chin and neck were in shadow. "Come on, Art," she said. "Come on what?" he said, afraid of her. "Before I change my mind." Rolling down the window, she tossed her cigarette out. It fell into the darkness. "I feel so awful. This is a terrible thing to do. It isn't fair to you or your wife or Jim or any of us. It's so mixed up, but what else is there, Art? I've been going around and around. I don't know. I really don't know." Her fingers reached up and touched his face. Moving toward him, she brought her lips close to him. He felt the pressure of her mouth, the hard, sharp pressure of her teeth as she kissed him. Her breath smelled of flowers and cinnamon. As he put his arms around her, he heard the rustle of her clothes and the faint giving of muscles and ligaments and joints, the stirrings of her body. Her sleeve brushed his eyes. She was clinging to him, resting her head against his neck. How heavy her head was. She lay on him, breathing shallowly. Panting, he thought. Not moving, but content to lie against him with her eyes shut, her arm up so that her fingers curled into his hair. She was discouraged and lonely, and he knew what she wanted. She wanted to lie close to him, turning her face up to be kissed. He held her face between his hands and lifted her. At once she let her lips slacken so that he could find her mouth. She was back into the past, living out her own young days. She was with him in the romance and excitement of a first date, wrapped up in his arms on the front seat of a car, parked at the side of the road above the lights of the city, overlooking the darkness, the night and fog. In other cars, other boys held their girls and petted them and kissed them. He ran his hands along the fabric of her blouse, along her shoulders and arms. He avoided her breasts because that was not what she wanted. Holding his mouth against hers, he poured out of him and into her the love she wanted. He lost nothing, and yet he felt her fill out and become powerful with it. She had to take it from him, but he had it to give her. "I love you," he said. She sighed. She said nothing. Her face lay pressed to his shoulder. Time passed, and she did not stir, and at last he realized that she had fallen asleep. Gently, he lifted her back until she rested against the door. Then he covered her with her coat. Starting up the engine, he drove down the hill, back into town. As they drove among the lights of Van Ness Avenue, she stirred a little, sat up, and then said, "Do you know where I live?" "No," he said, "but we're not going there. We're going back to Fillmore." "Take me home," she said. "You can call your wife from my place. Please?" He had been wrong. "Tell me where," he said. He felt leaden, but he did as she said. He could not back out. Beside him, she was opening her purse to get out her cigarettes. Neither of them spoke, and then she said, "Turn right here." He turned the car. "What are you going to tell her?" she said. "I don't know. I'll tell her something. I ran into these guys. Grimmelman, maybe." "You've never done anything like this before, have you?" "No," he said. "Do you want to?" "You don't have to. I won't make you do it." "I want to," he said. And he did want to. "You're really cute," he said. "You're really pretty." "Thank you, Art," she said. "I know you mean it. You wouldn't say so if you didn't." She seemed calm at this point. 10. After her husband and Pat had left the apartment to go to the liquor store, Rachel went into the kitchen and washed dishes. 10 or 15 minutes passed, and then she dried her hands and walked to the front door. "They're not coming back," she said, standing at the door. Jim Briskin was slow to agree. "Sure they are," he said. "No." She shook her head. "I knew this was going to happen sooner or later, but I thought it would be with the different guys, Grimmelman and those people." Jim opened the door and started up the steps. "They must have gone off in her car." "Where are you going?" "Hell." he said. "I'll try her apartment." "Let him go ahead," Rachel said. Her eyes were dry. He was amazed at her self-control. "She's very lovely, and look how grown-up she is. If he wants to, then he should. What difference does it make if they go ahead or not? I couldn't keep him here. Could you have kept her here?" "No," he said. But he did not come back inside. He remained on the steps. The door opened behind him. "You can't control other humans," Rachel said. "You can talk to them, but it doesn't make any difference. Maybe in little things, or if they believe it already. Anyhow, I'm glad she's so nice." He said, "I'll kill her." He meant it. He could feel her neck between his hands. "Why? You know she's had a lot to drink. You know Art and I have had trouble. He wanted to go out. There's so many things he hasn't done, and he wants to do them. He's too young. I was the only girl he dated. I guess I'm the only girl he ever... however you say it. People say it different ways. I don't know any good way." "There isn't," he said. "Not in a situation like this." He blamed himself. It was his fault. "Rachel," he said, coming back into the apartment, "I did it. I brought her here. And I knew she was in a state. I knew she was ready to try anything. We both were." "It's a bad thing for you," Rachel said, "since you're in love with her." "Look," he picked up his coat from the chair, "you stick around here. I'll go over to her place and try to round them up. I'll see you later." Without waiting, he left the apartment and went along the path to the sidewalk. Pat's car was gone all right. He hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of her apartment. The lights in her windows were off, and nobody answered his rings. Another tenant entered the building using his key for the main door, and Jim went into the lobby behind him. Upstairs at Pat's door, he knocked and then tried the knob. Still there was no answer. He listened, but he heard nothing. Going back downstairs to the street, he searched in vain for a sign of the Dodge. They were not here at her apartment. Where else, then? The only remaining place was the radio station. The time was 12:30, and Hubble would have locked up. Pat had a key, and she and Art would have the station to themselves. Again he flagged a cab. As it took him toward Geary Street, he thought to himself that at least he could pick up his car. It was still parked in the cab stand in front of the station. When he had paid the driver, he saw that his car was gone. The cab stand was empty. And, peering up, he saw no lights in the top-floor windows of the McLaughlin building. He walked around to the parking lot, and still there was no sign of his car, and no sign of Pat's Dodge. A drugstore down the street was open. He entered it, and, in a phone booth, called the station's number. The phone rang on and on. At last he gave up. They were not there either. He located the number of the Kearny Street police station and called. "My car's been stolen," he said. "I left it parked in front of where I am, and now it's gone." "Just a moment," the police voice said. Clicks deafened him, and then, after an endless pause, the voice returned. "What is your name?" He gave them his name. "It must have happened within the hour," he said. He felt absolutely futile. "The make and license number?" He gave that, too. "Just a moment, sir." Again there was a wait. "Your car was towed off," the police voice said. "It was parked in a hack stand, and the cab company phoned in a complaint." "Oh," he said. "Then where is it?" "I don't know. You'll have to inquire about it tomorrow morning. Be here at Kearny Street at 10:30, and arrangements will be made to return it to you." "Thanks," he said, hanging up. Without a car, he was more helpless than ever. He walked out onto the sidewalk, and when a cab passed, he waved to it. Again he was riding in a cab, and again he had given Pat's address. In his mind, he was positive that they would show up there. Maybe, he thought, they had gone for a ride. When the cab let him off before the apartment building, he saw the Dodge, moist and gleaming, parked by itself in a slot near the entrance. He rang the bell by her name, but there was no response. Again he waited. Presently a figure appeared on the other side of the door. A heavy-set man stepped out of the building, glanced at Jim, and went on. He caught the door before it shut. Somebody was always going in or out. He climbed the stairs to her floor. The door to her apartment was closed, and no light showed. He knocked. She did not answer, but he knew that this time they were here. Finally, he tried the knob. The door was unlocked. "Pat," he said, opening the door. The room was dark. "I'm in here," she said. He went into the bedroom. "Just you?" he demanded, fumbling to find the lamp. "Don't turn the light on." She was lying on the bed. "Wait a second." In the darkness, she rose up and moved. He was aware of her motions. "Okay," she said. "I wanted to put something on." Her voice was relaxed, and she sounded drowsy. "When did you get here? I was asleep." "Where's Art?" he said, snapping the light on. She lay stretched out in the bed, wearing a slip. Her feet were bare. Beside the bed, on the chair, was a neat pile of her clothing. Under the slip, she had on nothing at all. Her hair, dark and heavy, lay spread out on the pillow. He had never seen her so lacking in turmoil, so content. Smiling, she said, "I sent him home. I gave him money for a cab." "Well," he said, "you've destroyed their marriage." "No," she said. "I've been thinking about it. I'm a girl he went with before his marriage. Do you see? This is what he missed. Do you know that Rachel is the first girl he ever took out?" "I took you over there," he said, "and you wrecked those kids. You went right to work." Sitting up, she said, "No, you're wrong. You wanted to go to bed with somebody, and you couldn't go to bed with me, so you went to bed with him." Pat said, "It isn't just him. When I saw Rachel, I wanted to have her. Try to understand. I'm in love with both of them, and so are you. When I saw her, I wanted to make love to her. I wanted to kiss her and pet her. I wanted to take her to bed and fondle her. But of course I couldn't. But it doesn't matter which one of them. I'm glad you took me over there, because now I've finally come back to life. It's the same with you, too. Isn't that so?" "Christ," he said, "don't include me in this." "They're our children," she said. He sat down on the bed beside her. In a sense, she was right. He could not deny what she had said. "They hold us together," she said, gazing up at him, her arms loose at her sides. Under her slip, her small, unsupported breasts hung forward. At each, pressing against the slip, a dab of shadow rose and fell. Her face had a scrubbed look, and her makeup was gone. "I can't bring myself to trust you, and I can't come to you because of that. And you haven't been able to trust me, have you? Neither of us has any trust in the other. But we trust them. You knew this was my fault, didn't you?" "Yes," he said. "That's what I mean. For years we've had no confidence in each other, but we love them, and we believe in everything about them. So we can go to them. They're the only persons in the world we can really go to. I think we get to each other through them. We can let go with them. We can get the peacefulness we need." "What a miserable rationalization," he said. "You ought to be weeping in agony instead of lying there." "I'm very happy," she said. "I feel close to you. Don't you feel you've been with me? It was you I was with, here, not somebody else. Don't you remember how we used to lie together afterward? Remember when we were up in the cabin, how we used to just lie around? I guess we were exhausted. But there were no tensions. We were just limp and fagged out. I always felt closer to you afterward, even more than when we were actually doing it. To me, doing it is..." She was silent a moment. "Just a means, isn't that so? God ended first, before I got my diaphragm. When you used those awful things, we were so far apart. It wasn't until afterward that we could come together, that we could lie around." "I remember what you said," he said. "About what?" "Oh, yes, those things you used." "Before we found out we didn't have to use anything." She said, "It was like having a length of green plastic garden hose inside me. I never got anything from that. Did you?" "No," he said, "not completely." "What about now? Have I cheated you again? Do you feel that way?" She caught hold of his arm.
We're going to have to go on reaching each other through them. You know that, don't you? We're too involved now. We can't break away.
Where were you, he said. Earlier I came by.
We drove up to Twin Peaks and parked.
Why didn't you do it there?
If the police caught us, they'd send me to prison or something. And anyhow, it's ugly in a car. I wanted to do it here, where you were, the other night.
You're really heartless, he said.
No, she said, I'm not. You'll see. You'll get to me through the girls. We'll live through them.
What about them? Her eyes rose to focus on him.
This will be a great and tremendous thing for them. It already is.
How do you figure that out?
Because, she said, they love us. They admire us. We're what they want to be. We'll all merge together, the four of us. We'll be complete. We'll be able to walk around on the face of the earth again. And we can throw out the trivial people, Bob Posen and all of them. I mean it. I feel so much love for you. It's inside me, and I feel you got to it tonight.
If I did, he said, I don't know it. I was somewhere else at the time.
Hand me my clothes, she said. Would you?
He gave her the pile of clothes. Still lying propped up on the pillow, she sorted through them. She untangled her underclothes and stockings.
I'm going on with this, she said.
She hugged the clothes to her breast.
It's going to save both of us, and I'm not going to give it up. Tonight I found what we needed. You knew that, or you wouldn't have brought me there.
That was such a mistake, he said. Such a terrible goddamn mistake.
You know I'm right.
He said, this is just a lot of hot air to justify taking that kid and seducing him.
Yes, she said. I guess that's what I did.
Now sitting up, she bent forward and tugged her slip-off over her head. She stood up, naked. Her body, smooth and pale, disappeared into her underclothes, and then she was buttoning her dress.
If it was wrong, she said, shaking her hair back from her eyes, I wouldn't feel like this. I wouldn't feel so completely good.
A length of green garden hose, he said.
What's that? You?
Standing up on tiptoes, she kissed him on the mouth.
No, you were perfect. Everything I could want. Everything I ever hoped for.
That kid, he said.
That kid, she said, was you. Still is you.
Is the girl safe? He said. At the dresser, she brushed her hair with a hairbrush, her head down, her arms raised.
They're both safe. So are we. We're in together. We can't menace them, can we? How is this a menace? Have I taken anything away from him? Have you taken anything from her?
No, he said, and I'm not going to. She had stopped brushing her hair.
Jim, she said, if this doesn't heal you and me, then nothing ever will. Do you understand? Do you see that?
I see, he said, that after you finish messing around here and wrecking these kids' marriage and lives, you're going to say that's it, and you're going back and marry Bob Posen.
I won't marry him, she said, under any circumstances, whatever happens.
Thank God for that, he said.
If this doesn't work out, I don't know what I'll do. Anyhow...
She tossed down her hairbrush and ran over to him. Her eyes were bright with joy.
I'm so happy. It was like nothing on earth. He just never got tired or wore out the way we used to. We could have gone on forever, all night and all day tomorrow, and on, not even eating or sleeping, just going on forever.
How about your job? His tone made the coloring glow vanish from her. She finished dressing, and then she said,
How's Rachel?
Okay.
Did she say anything?
Not much. Pat said,
I'm a little scared of her.
I don't blame you.
Would she do anything?
I haven't any idea. But, he said, I'm glad I'm not in your shoes. He patted her on the back. Think about that for a while.
She's just a kid, Pat said. She's only 16.
But in her voice was a thread of concern.
That's silly. She'll mope for a while, like you. But, my God, he's going back to her. Does she think this is going to last forever? It's not.
he said. We'll see. Leaving her apartment, he walked downstairs. When he got home to his own apartment, the phone was ringing. Leaving the hall door open, with his key in the lock, he crossed the dark, cold living room and groped on the table at the end of the couch. "Hello?" he said, finding the receiver. An ashtray tumbled to the floor, disappearing from sight. "This is Pat." She was crying, and he could barely understand her. "I'm sorry, Jim. I don't know what to do. I'm so unhappy." Softening, he said, "Don't feel bad. It can probably be patched up." "I wish we hadn't gone over there. I didn't mean to get involved with him." "It wasn't your fault," he said. It was his fault, not hers.
"They're both so sweet,"
Pat said. She was blowing her nose and undoubtedly wiping her eyes. "Better go to bed," he said. "Get some sleep. You have to go to work tomorrow."
"Do you forgive me?"
"Don't be silly," he said.
"Do you?"
"Of course." She said,
"I wish we could get along. It's so miserable. What do you think will happen? Is Rachel out gunning for me? Do you think she'll be after me?"
"Go to bed," he repeated.
"I guess you don't want to come back here tonight, even for a while."
"I can't," he said. "The cops towed away my car."
"I could get you in my car."
"Go to bed," he repeated. "I'll see you in a day or so. I'll call you up."
"Is it too late for me to call her tonight?"
"If I were you," he said, "I'd stay away from them."
"All right,"
Pat said. He hung up, and then he went stiffly into the bathroom and turned on water for a shower. 11. In the course of keeping strong ties with his various clients, Bob Posen met Hugh Collins, the wealthy San Francisco credit optometrist, for lunch. "Hugh, old man," he said. Across the table they shook hands. Collins was a balding, middle-aged person with the grimacing smile of the successful businessman. Station KOIF had carried his ads for 3 years, hourly spots before and after the summary of the news. Dr. H.L. Collins's offices were located on Market Street and in Oakland, and down the coast in San Jose. He was a major account. "You're looking well," Posen said. "Same can be said for you, Bob," Collins said. "How's the eye business?" "Can't complain." "Still selling glasses?" "Plenty of them." The baked salmon steaks arrived. Both men began to eat. Toward the conclusion of the meal, Hugh Collins mentioned why he had got hold of Posen. "Guess you know about our convention." "Say," Posen said, "that's right. What is it, all the optometrists in North America?" "Just in the West," Collins said. "Big doings," Posen said. "Plenty big. We're holding it at the St. Francis Hotel." "Starts this week, doesn't it?" Posen said. He had only a hazy idea of such convention activity. "Next week," Collins said, "and I'm heading the entertainment committee." "Yeah?" Posen said. "Look here," Collins said, leaning toward him. "I want to show you something I picked up for the boys. Not all of them, just the fellows, if you get me. Personal pals." From under the table he slipped Posen a flat, disc-like container. "What's this?" Posen said, holding it cautiously, suspecting a trick. "Go ahead, open it." "What'll it do, give me a shock?" He was familiar with convention gimmicks. "No, just open it." Posen opened it. Inside the container was a pornographic gewgaw, brightly colored, made of durable plastic. The kind that in the old days had been made from ordinary red phosphorus kitchen matches and was imported from Mexico. During World War II, he had been stationed at El Paso and had gone down to Juarez and brought such items back. He had made a steady profit on them. It was a shock to see such a thing again after so many years. This one was better made. He put it through its limited paces. It had only 2 postures, going to and doing. "What do you think?" Collins said. "Great," he said, closing the gewgaw up in its box. "That ought to go over?" "Absolutely," Posen said. Folding and unfolding his napkin, Hugh Collins said, "Of course, that won't hold them for long." "It'll give them something to fiddle with," Posen said, "so they won't stick their hands up girls' dresses along Market Street." At that, a queer, strained look appeared on the optometrist's face. "Look here," he said hoarsely. "Sure, Hugh." "You run a radio station. You must see a lot of folks in the entertainment field. Singers, Dancers? Sure, he said. You got any ideas? For our entertainment program. Poston, out of spite, said, like a young fellow to sing pop ballads? No, Collins said, perspiring. I mean, well, some gal who can really entertain. Afraid it's out of my line, Poston said. Disappointed, Collins said, I see. But maybe I know a guy who can help you. An agent. He handles a bunch of singers and similar stuff in San Francisco, for different supper clubs and night spots and the Pacific Avenue places. What's his name? Tony Vacuhi. I'll have him give you a call. I'd really appreciate it, Hugh Collins said. Behind his glasses, his eyes sparkled moistly. I really would, Bob. That evening, Tony Vacuhi, seated at the desk in the front room of his flat, dialed the official phone number of the optometrists' convention. Let me talk to Hugh Collins, he said. Dr. Collins isn't here, a functionary's voice, answered. Well, I got to get hold of him, Vacuhi said. He wanted some information, and now that I got it for him, I can't get hold of him. End of side 3. To continue, turn the cassette over.